take a look at this. Off the western tip of Wales, there is a long, thin peninsula that reaches out into the sea like a pointing finger. And 2 miles past the fingertip, alone in some of the fiercest tidal currents anywhere in Britain, there is a small green island that people have always said is shaped like an apple, floating just out of reach. It has its own mountain on one end. On the other end, a thread of low land runs out to a lighthouse, painted in red and white stripes, square instead of round, which almost no lighthouse on Earth is. Today, 3 people live here all year round. But for about 100 years, this half-mile rock had something that almost no place its size has ever had. It had a crown, and it had a king to wear it. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. When I first found this place on a map, I felt something I didn't expect. Most forgotten islands tell you a story about leaving. This one does too, but it begins with people who believed this tiny rock was the holiest ground in the country. For 1,000 years, they crossed a deadly stretch of water just to be buried here, because they believed it put them closer to heaven than anywhere else on Earth. This is Ynys Enlli, Bardsey Island, and this is the story of a kingdom the size of a farm, and the old man who rode it away. The Welsh name, Enlli, means the island in the currents, and the currents are the whole point. The water between the island and the mainland runs at up to 9 knots, faster than most people can row, and when the wind turns against the tide, it breaks into standing waves. For most of human history, that water kept the island a world of its own. People have lived out here for 4,000 years. Then, around the year 516, a monk named Cadfan came across from Brittany and built a monastery, said to be one of the first in all of Britain. And something strange happened to the reputation of this rock. People came to believe that to be buried on Enlli was to be saved, that 3 pilgrimages here equaled 1 all the way to Rome. They called it the Island of 20,000 Saints, and they said no matter where you put your spade in the ground, you would strike a grave. The old Welsh stories went further still. They whispered that this was the true Avalon, that Merlin himself sleeps in a hidden cave here, guarding the lost treasures of Britain, waiting for a king who never comes. That is legend, but it tells you how people felt about this place. For centuries, the most ordinary half-mile of land in Wales was treated as a doorway to paradise. And then the monks were gone. The King of England closed the monasteries in the 1500s, and the great abbey fell into ruin. For a while, pirates used the island. And then, quietly, ordinary people moved out onto the rock to farm it and fish it. A dozen families, living in a handful of stone houses, 2 miles past the end of the world. And it's here that the strangest chapter begins. Because the family that owned the island, the Newboroughs, decided the islanders needed a leader. Communication with the mainland was so rare and so dangerous that the islanders had stopped following the laws of the land entirely. They made their own rules. So the Lord chose one man from among the tenants and told the others to obey him. And then, half as a joke and half in earnest, he declared that this man should be called the King of Bardsey. He was given a crown. Not a crown of gold. The crown of Bardsey was made of tin, beaten out and chased with a design of little seahorses and shells. He was given a treasure, a small silver box, and an army, which was a single wooden soldier, painted to guard it. And from then on, the oldest man on the island wore that tin crown and was crowned at the narrowest point of the island, standing on a chair, with the whole community watching. Just sit with that for a second. On a rock you could walk across in 20 minutes, a place with no doctor, no road, no shop, there was a king. A real one, with a real crown, recognized by everyone who lived there. The first of them, a man named John Williams, drowned trying to cross that 9-knot channel alone, the day after his wife gave birth to their son. The sea took him on a crossing he should never have made by himself. But the king everyone remembers is the last one. His name was Pritchard. He was born on the island in 1842, and when the old king before him faltered, Love simply announced, "I am the oldest, I am going to be king now." And that was that. He had a great flowing white beard like a sea god, and even in his 80s, people said he could pick up a full sack of flour with one hand and swing it onto his shoulder as if it weighed nothing. And here is what I keep thinking about. When the First World War broke out, Pritchard, the King of Bardsey, offered himself and all the men of his island for military service. They turned him down. They told him he was too old, 71 years of age, and Pritchard took this as a genuine insult to his kingdom. So he declared that Bardsey was now a neutral power, his own country in the war, A few years later, he sailed to the mainland town of Pwllheli, still wearing his tin crown, and he was met by David Lloyd George, who had just been the Prime Minister of the entire British Empire. And Lloyd George, charmed, bowed to the old man and called him the king from a foreign land. It would be a wonderful story if it ended there. It doesn't. Because while the old king was holding court, his kingdom was dying underneath him. One by one, the young people were leaving. On the mainland, 2 miles away, there was now a cinema. There was the wireless, the radio, music coming out of the air. There were jobs that didn't depend on whether the sea would let you launch a boat that morning, and to a young person on Bardsey, that mainland glittered. They went, and they did not come back. And the island runs on young arms. You need men to row the boats out through those currents. You need them to haul the cattle, to work the land, to launch the lifeboat when a ship is in trouble. By the middle of the 1920s, there simply weren't enough of them left. A newspaper, the Daily Sketch, sent a reporter out, and the article they printed had a heartbreaking title, "Life Too Dull: Why Bardsey is Being Deserted." And the old king gave them the plainest, saddest reason a civilization has ever ended. He said, "We have not enough men to row boats off for us and look after the cattle." So in the winter of 1925, Love Pritchard, 82 years old, the king of Bardsey, led the last of his people off his own island. He climbed into the boats with them and crossed the currents one final time, to live out his days on the mainland he had spent his whole life refusing. And there is a detail about that crossing I have never been able to shake. As the little flotilla of boats pulled away, carrying the islanders and everything they could fit, it was the king himself who lifted a camera and took the photographs. He stood and documented his own kingdom leaving. The last king of Bardsey, recording the end of Bardsey with his own hands. He died the very next year. They buried him on the mainland, in the churchyard at Aberdaron, down close to the beach, where on a clear day you can still see the island sitting out on the water. He had outlived his kingdom by exactly 1 year. The crown went into a drawer in a museum in Liverpool, a city in England, where for decades it sat in storage, a tin crown for a kingdom that no longer existed. For most of the next 50 years, the island lay nearly silent. The houses emptied. In 1875, a visiting reverend had called Bardsey a Paris of a place. It was that busy. By the 1930s, there were barely 50 people. The lighthouse keepers held on the longest, more than a century of them, until 1987, when a machine took over the light, and the last keepers packed up and left too. And that, it seemed, was the end. Another small place, swallowed by the modern world. Another goodbye. Except the island was keeping a secret, and nobody found it until almost the year 2000. A bird watcher was staying in one of the old cottages, and he was using apples to draw the birds in close. A nurseryman happened to be visiting, a man named Ian Sturrock, and he noticed something about those apples. They didn't look like any variety he knew. He traced them to a single old apple tree, gnarled and twisted by a century of Atlantic wind, growing alone beside one of the abandoned houses, near the ruins of the old abbey. He took the fruit to the experts at the National Fruit Collection, and the verdict came back that nobody expected. This was the rarest apple in the world, a variety that existed nowhere else on the planet. One tree. And when they worked out where it had come from, the story became almost unbearable. That tree is believed to be the last living survivor of the orchard the monks planted on Bardsey, 1,000 years ago. Through the rise of the kings and the fall of the kings. Through the Exodus, when every single person climbed into the boats and left. Through 50 years of empty houses and silence, that one tree stood by the ruined abbey and kept doing the only thing it knew how to do. Every autumn, in an empty kingdom, it made apples, streaked pink over cream, with a faint scent of lemon, and on that disease-ridden earth, both the tree and its fruit were somehow completely free of disease. The island had quietly kept one thing alive that the whole world had lost. They have grafted that tree now. The rarest apple in the world is no longer dying alone on a rock. It grows in gardens across Wales, across Britain, even across the ocean in America. The thing the monks planted has finally left the island, and this time it's spreading. And slowly, Bardsey itself is coming back. A trust bought the island to save it, and when they once advertised for a single farmer to live out there and work the land, 1,100 people applied. 1,100 people, longing to live on the rock that everyone once fled. In 2014, they changed the great lighthouse beam from white to red, because the old white light had been pulling migrating birds to their deaths in the dark for a century, and overnight, the dying stopped. And in 2023, Because there is no town for 70 miles, and the island's own mountain blocks the glow of the mainland, Bardsey was named the first dark sky sanctuary in all of Europe, one of the darkest, clearest night skies left on the continent, over the island of 20,000 saints. Sometimes the smallest places hold the biggest stories. This half-mile of rock in the Welsh currents was a doorway to heaven, and then a kingdom with a tin crown, and then an empty silence, and then, when no one was looking, the keeper of the rarest living thing of its kind on earth. It held a king who declared wartime neutrality and was bowed to by a prime minister. It held an old man who photographed his own world leaving, and it held a single tree that refused to go when everyone else did, and outlasted the kingdom, and the kings, and the goodbye. 3 people live there now. But the apples still come every autumn, and the stars over Bardsey are the brightest in Europe. If you've ever heard of Bardsey, or Ynys Enlli, or stood on the Welsh coast and seen it out on the water, let me know in the comments. And let me know where I should go next. See you in the next one.